I am Johnny Detroit from pregame.com. I'm with Chris Andrews, legendary bookmaker, 30 years plus in the business. And the best part is the fact that that 30 years encompasses the different eras of Vegas. He was there when the mob guys were running it. He was there when the corporation slowly took over. And then he was there when the corporations essentially ran the show. And he's still connected deep within the industry as we're seeing some of the Europeans come over and slowly start to take over the sports books in Vegas. So in my eyes, Chris has been there. He knows where the bodies are buried. So without further ado, Chris, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand it over to you. You sent me your quick bio, but I've met you in person a bunch of times. I've talked to you a bunch of times. So I know that there's a lot of stuff. And to me, this is really what is going to identify who Chris Andrews is. And for anyone who is not using just the phone to listen, but actually watching live on the screen, you see the Vegas, welcome to Las Vegas. You see a photo of Tony Spilotro. Hopefully Chris could tell us some stories there. You see a photo of a sports book. And, Chris has owned casinos. He's ran sports books. And then you also see a photo of one of the most legendary people in the business, Roxy Roxborough. And I'm sure when Chris kind of goes over his timeline, he'll let you know that he gave Roxy his first actual job because Roxy was whooping his ass as a bettor. So, Chris, I'm going to hand it over to you. I read your bio. Start off because you have a lot of famous people in your family, a lot of people who are involved in the historical end of Las Vegas on the sports betting and casino side. So start off with the beginning stories of you and some relatives with some famous names making your own parlay cards. I'm going to sit back and just listen to you. Go ahead.
Well, I'll tell you, we did start very young. It was myself and my two cousins. And even though we were cousins, big Greek family, John, and I know there's a lot of Greeks in Detroit. Matter of fact, I got some half-assed relatives there too. We really grew up more like brothers, and we were only 4 months apart between the four of us. So we grew up, we went to the same grade schools, we played the same Little League. Anyway, we also booked together too. So my one cousin, his father was a professional bettor, even back in Pittsburgh. And we would go in and sneak his sheets, and we'd write down the line. And we didn't have copy machines or anything. We're talking like 1967. We would just write out the parlay cards. Now, John, I know you weren't even born yet, but back then the Steelers were the worst team in the NFL, and Pitt, the University of Pittsburgh, was a horrible college team. I think they were 1-9, like 3 or 4 years in a row. So everybody would bet either the Steelers or on Pitt pretty much every single week. We took nickels, and I don't mean 500. We took a nickel. We took lunch money, and we had one kid would bet us $1, and we'd sweat his parlay every week. But John, it was such a sweet racket. We'd use games. If a game was Pickem, we'd use -3, -3, ties lose.
If people used to play. So who was some of these cousins and relatives? Who were some of these people? Because I know a lot of them are people, for
Right.
guys that go back in time, involving professional bettors and whatnot. Some of these names are going to be familiar. So some of these stories, the ones you feel comfortable with, feel free to name drop.
Well, I might as well name drop because it's all well known now. My one cousin is Art Manteris, who's the vice president of Station Casinos, vice president of Race and Sports. My uncle is Jack Franzi, who is one of the best known guys in Las Vegas, is an odds maker for over 20 years. He worked with Michael Gaughan, started at the Barbary Coast with Michael, and then went when Michael expanded his operations. Michael's now at the South Point. Now Michael's 84 years old. He's retired, although he's still, let's say he's actively betting, I would say, and still involved in the business. We talk at least once a week. And then my other cousin was his son, who's not as well known. His name's Zach Franzi, but Zach's been a professional gambler here in Las Vegas for over 20 years. So we've all stayed in the business. So anyway, that was in 5th and 6th grade. We did that. Then we did the usual stuff in high school and college, booking, out of our pocket and running parlay cards, all that sort of thing. And when my uncle, and it's a matter of public record, he got indicted in 1970 for gambling and bookmaking and whatever. And Well, I won't give the whole details, but the FBI kind of screwed up the case and got thrown out of court. But the funniest thing about that is there was a young law clerk who was just out of college, just graduated law school. It was his first job. He had, didn't go into private practice. His job was working for the FBI. Well, he was doing the transcripts and listening in on my uncle's conversations. They had the phones tapped. Well, he was taking my uncle's games and betting them. And now, of course, we don't know this, but 20 years later, he wound up becoming a successful attorney and knew my uncle and told him that story. And we thought that was hilarious. That was a pretty good, we got a pretty good kick out of that. And, he always laughed because my uncle got, besides picking a lot of winners, always got some great numbers too that he could never duplicate.
You gotta love that the guy from the FBI who's listening to the wiretap is betting games that he's listening to on the wiretap.
Right, yeah, right. Listen, some guys are looking to crucify you. This guy was looking to get the games and go bet them himself. So you got to appreciate that. So go ahead.
So fast forward a little bit is you're booking parlay cards. How did your life from there? I'm assuming you stayed in the bookmaking. You went from taking like 5-cent bets to most bookmakers, then you're taking 50 cents a dollar, and then where you were. So take us through a quick timeline, because we have a lot of questions we need to get to, but I don't really want to miss any of this stuff because a lot of people love these old school stories. And, I have some questions that I want to bring up on the webinar. You told me a couple really good stories back when the mob was running it of, one of like some post-dating tickets and whatnot, but we'll get to that in a second. So go ahead. So you're doing parlay cards. You've got some famous relatives that turned around and, have been part of Vegas lore. So you're booking parlay cards. What's the next chapter in the life of Chris Andrews?
Well, so I got through college. I graduated. I was a smart kid. I graduated cum laude, but I didn't like the whole business world, and I just kept booking. And I was in Pittsburgh, and eventually I just decided, what, this is. I don't want to be running from the cops the rest of my life. I came to Las Vegas, as did my whole family. I really loved Pittsburgh. I hated to leave, but eventually I knew my future was elsewhere, and so I came out to Las Vegas. My first job was in the Stardust. Now, this was right after Lefty Rosenthal and Marty Kane and Joey Boston. They all got tossed out. Now, this is about the time that the movie Casino is based upon this time. And I saw a lot of that stuff. Tony Spilotro, we'd see him occasionally. His brother was in. Now, Tony was banned, even though he did come in occasionally. His brother was not banned. His brother would come in, and we'd see him. His brother, and I think his brother, unfortunately, got murdered along with Tony, was actually a very nice guy. Was just one of those guys in the wrong place at the wrong time. I don't think he ever really did anything all that bad, certainly that I knew of. But there was a lot of shenanigans going on, and there's some people that have passed away since then. So we saw a few things happening with the way they would post date some tickets, and listen, when you have the auditor in your pocket, the auditing function is supposed to be somewhat of a sacred function, let's say, and it was anything but that. But that went along really well, for them. Went along really well until it didn't, until they kind of got caught. So
real quick, Chris, the first time that I ever met you, you told me two funny stories. One of them is it was some baseball team they were up so many games, and the tickets were handwritten, and they like post dated a bet. And do you remember this story?
I do remember the story. It wasn't post dated, but this is now. Let's fast forward a couple years. So I got hired by Calneva up in Reno. Again, make a long story short, there was some associated ownership between Calneva and the Boyd Group. Now, when the state finally came in and threw all those guys out of the Stardust, they brought the Boyd Group in to manage the place, which is actually a big deal. It happened very rarely in Las Vegas, but when it happened, it is a huge deal because then when the state forces the Stardust ownership to disband, whoever's in there has the first crack at taking over the place. So anyway, I went in there to go and look through and kind of do my own audit function on these tickets. Well, the one that I found was really funny, and I remembered it because I'm being a Pittsburgh Pirate fan. They wrote themselves a ticket on the Philadelphia Phillies at 100-1 to win the National League with about 10 days to play in the season. And the Phillies were up, I want to say, about 6 games with 10 to play.
So real quick, for anyone who's listening that's not too smart, 100-1 on a team with a little over a week left in the season, up 6 games. And
right.
The mysterious, the guys with the crooked noses magically have this ticket in the drawer with that team 100-1. So continue, Chris.
Yeah, so they were 100-1, and what do you know? They wound up blowing it. They lost on the last day of the season, and I think it was the Pirates that beat them. And there was 2 divisions, of course, so they still had to win. They were going to win the division and then win one series, beat either the Reds or the Dodgers, and they would win the National League. But certainly, the price at that point in time is about 2-1. Certainly not 100-1. But that was the ticket they wrote for themselves. And we saw some other ones. I mean, there was Pickem games. Like I remember seeing a Rose Bowl game that was the number was like about 2 or 3, and their bets were written at like plus 13.5 and plus 14. And these were all handwritten tickets. And it's one of those things in our business. I mean, who's to say what a number is? We don't know. This week we think Detroit's a 3.5 or 4-point dog, but I mean they might win by 30. We don't know. But that's the kind of stuff that they got away with in those days. Doesn't happen anymore.
Right. Another one is when people always want to say, for sure way to win. It seemed like these guys, the shadier element back in those days when you got started. And I remember another story you told me. I think it was a Monday Night Football game, and I think it might have been somebody connected to Spilatro. Is you said they came up with like a grocery bag full of cash, and they wanted to bet whoever the Monday night team was. And you had to get the supervisor. They saw where they were, and then his friend behind him took the other team. But something like they got plus points on both teams. Do you remember that story?
I do, yeah. And I'm not going to mention that name for sure. However, they just give me so and so, and it was like give me so and so pick them for 50,000, and then give me the other side plus 4 for 50,000. And I just looked at my boss, and he just says, well, go ahead and write the ticket. Okay, I mean, what do I know? But, those guys, listen, they were always nice to me. You knew not to go too far with them, but you certainly don't want to cross them. I tried not to get too close. But in all honesty, they were always really good to me. I would certainly hate to be on the wrong side of any of those guys.
Didn't you ever, was that you, Chris? You told me one time you had a run-in with either Spilatro or one of his boys, and you didn't really know who they were?
No. What happened, actually, I helped one of their boys, and I didn't know who he was. He had gotten into a fight, and he was a little guy, and he kind of, he got his butt whooped pretty good. This was in the casino, and kind of as everything was going crazy, I got some paper towels from the bathroom and just helped clean this kid up. And the next day, one of their guys came in to me and he said, listen, we saw what you did. Here's $500 for helping out our boy. And I said, well, I don't want to take that. I mean, he was my friend. I was just helping him. He was on the wrong end of the fight. They said, no, you got to take that. I said, no, I really don't. Listen, you don't know how far you could go even saying no, but I managed to just say, no, I don't want it. Thank you very much. I appreciate the thoughts. I tried to say it as inoffensively as possible, but I really didn't want to take the money. I felt, that would give me a little bit too much of a connection. And, listen, I was a kid working for $50 a day. $500 was the world to me at that time, but I think I made the right move not taking that dough.
So you're a kid making $50, and anyone who knows your track record in history, I mean, eventually you're part owner of a casino. You were running sports books in full. So kind of fast forward, because like I said, we're about 20 minutes in and we've got a shitload of questions. So fast forward, how do you become a ticket writer? And I know you're connected amongst your family, but in a business like that, you're booking millions, if not billions, over the course of your career in action. You're not going to put the stupid family member in charge of running your family business. So obviously, there was something you had to do or impress to, even with the connections, to fast forward up the food chain like you did. So let's fast forward. And so you're a ticket writer. How do we get to where we are further down in life?
Well, let me just do this a little quickly because it still was family connections. When my uncle got over to the Barbary Coast, they wanted to do things the right way and book high and all that other stuff. So I got the job there, and I was still labeled a ticket writer, but I was kind of the supervisor. But on that swing shift, which I ran, you really were responsible for everything, John. And it was a whole different world. You wrote the tickets, you graded the tickets, you did the accounting work, you balanced at the end of the night. As our business got a little more sophisticated, those functions all got separated, so there would be less chance of any monkey business. Now, just so happened, I mean, I knew the Gone family, my uncle was involved. I wasn't going to pull anything, but it really would have been quite easy had you wanted to do that. And that helped me tremendously as I learned the business. Then when Calneva, who was up in Reno, Scotty Shetler was running it up there. And Scott was a great name in this business, still is, although he's kind of retired now. But Scott just didn't like Reno. Other than that, he wanted to help them with the transition. Warren Nelson, who was one of the primary owners up there, was very good friends with Michael and Jackie Gone. They recommended me. I went up there. I was only 25 years old. I was just a kid. And I went in and interviewed, and I had a pretty good knowledge of the business. And Bob Martin, who was another guy I'd known from the time I was really a teenager. Warren Nelson also knew Bob. Bob spoke highly of me, and they put me in charge. And it was just a tiny little casino. Well, it was a small casino, but the sports book was only 2 windows. And we grew that from 2 windows into over 20 locations throughout the state of Nevada. And that was really my big break, getting that job with Calneva when I was 25 years old.
So you're a bookmaker, and now all of a sudden you're not just a ticket writer, you're helping to run the sports books. Go over to me back in that day, because a lot of times these guys call themselves bookmakers, and all they're really doing is watching Don Best. Is taking the line, taking the action, kind of go over a day of being a bookmaker in that era of what your day was like, what the action was like, how you moved the line, what went into it. And I'm just gonna sit back and listen because to be honest, I'd say 1 out of 3 questions that I got, and this is I'll skip that from the Q&A and put it right in this Who is Chris Andrews and kill multiple birds with one stone. Is a lot of the questions were, what was it like back then? How did you make the line? How did you adjust the line? And any big stories of big bets or bad beats from the house. So go ahead, Chris.
Well, it was obviously completely different. I mean, we never dreamt. I mean, I didn't. I hardly knew what a computer was. I mean, I knew it was just a sophisticated adding machine at that point. So we would get the line in the morning. You'd get your phone call, and it was from my uncle, from Jack Franzi. He would call me and he'd give me the line, and you put it up. And I started during June, so it was baseball season. So you put it up, and it was just John, back in those days, you took a bet and you moved the number. That's the way it was. There's nobody else to check with. Sometimes some goofy things would happen. Maybe you got bet 2 or 3 times on a game, and you might make a phone call. What's going on with this or that? And that's how you ran the business. The funny thing, John, was back then you didn't do any better or worse than what you're doing right now. So really, as the bettors have caught up, the bookmakers have caught up, and it's just been kind of a vicious cycle. You're not doing any better no matter which end of the counter you're on. However, at that time, the totals were something that were brand new, especially in baseball. So my uncle, he's an old school guy. I mean, he's 84 years old now. So, go back 30 years. He was 54. He really didn't want to get involved with this new thing, these baseball totals. So he'd give them to me. He'd give them to, 8, 8.5, 9, no under 15, over a quarter, none of that stuff. You just were booking on a blank 11 to 10 number. Well, Roxy Roxborough came up to Reno, and I knew Roxy a little bit in Las Vegas, just really to say hello to. So Roxy came up, and he used to come up to Reno and Las Vegas because back in those days, you really would get a bunch of different numbers. It's not like today where everything's painted on. Because guys did, you took a bet, you moved the line, so you can get all kind of crazy stuff. So Roxy would come up and he'd hang around and he'd bet a little bit and play some horses and just spend a little time up in northern Nevada. He liked it. So he was coming up and he was betting me these baseball totals, and I have to tell you, I mean, they were awful, and he was just killing me. And he'd come in and let's say if I had a game 8, he'd bet me under. I'd go to 8 under $1.20. Bet me 8 under again. I might go $1.30 or 7.5 over, something like that. And I'd let him bet. And John, I think that's why a lot of people in this business, you won't find too many guys knock me because I never gave the wise guys a hard time. I always tried to be fair. These were our limits. You could bet that, and I tried not to screw them around. And I think a lot of that came forward in Roxy. So he bet, and when he was done betting, I said, Roxy, you finished? You done? Yeah, okay. Where should I be on this total? Because really, Roxy was one of the revolutionary guys that changed betting on totals in baseball. We used to just take the ERA of the two starting pitchers and add them together, and that was the total. Well, Roxy kind of figured out that it was the stadium that was the biggest variable in the totals, and you had to go by that. So he would kind of tell me, and sometimes I might be a run and a half off on some of these. So I mean, it was just gravy for him. So he stayed up for a couple of weeks, and we got to be friends. I mean, he beat the hell out of me, but listen, he's betting his money, and I didn't hold it against him. Win, lose, that's the game. So finally says, yeah, you know what, you're a nice guy. I'm going back to Vegas tomorrow. Let's go have a drink or whatever. I said, okay. So we go have a drink. And I said, Russ, you're going back to Vegas, so you're not going to be betting me. Why don't you call me with the baseball totals every day? And he looked at me and says, yeah. He goes, yeah, I could do that. What do you think it's worth? And I just said, I don't know. How much $200 a week sound? And he says, yeah, that sounds okay. And that was our deal. I mean, it was about 5 seconds of negotiating. Obviously, I offered him too much, Johnny, since he took it right away. But he did take the 200 a week, and we started from there. So he started calling me. So I was getting 2 phone calls. He started giving me the totals, but then he says, let me give you the line too. Then that way, at least you have 2 lines to look at. You can decide for yourself. So I started that. And then I started doing some more things with half times. And again, my uncle didn't really want to fool with that kind of stuff. So Roxy was helping me on those. So from our relationship, and I helped him get a couple other clients in northern Nevada. And from there, he just grew his business. And listen, he's a legend in this business. And he parlayed that little thing that I gave him into a monster industry for himself. But I did give him that first job, and I always lay claim to that. But we were both busted back then, Johnny. He'd come up to town a couple times, and he was sleeping on my couch, and we'd go up to the lake and play some horses now and then, and we were out fooling around. We were betting this and that, and of course he was betting against me part of the time, but I had him betting for me, and we did a lot of stuff together. So we really had a good time, and we're still friends to this day. We had dinner together last time he was in town. So I gave him that first break. But anyway, he did help me too as I grew my business, because back then, there were very old school bookmakers running most of the books in this state, and they did not have progressive ideas, and I did, and I had, and I was, listen, I'm a fairly smart guy, a good mathematical background. Roxy as well had a very good mathematical background. So we started doing some things together. I came up with the 10-point teaser card, and nobody had ever used that before that. And now they call them the super teaser, the big teaser, whatever. But I'm the one that I calculated the odds for all that. I went back a couple years just charting games. Did the same thing with all the quarter bets. As far as I know, I was the first one to use those on a regular basis. People would put those out for the Super Bowl or maybe an NFC or AFC playoff game. I was using them each and every week, and Roxy again helped me with quite a bit of that. So we did those kind of things, and as our business grew, John, we were just a small little casino in Reno. We were going against Harrah's, who had an international name, MGM Grand, who at the time when that was built, it was the biggest casino in the world. And I'm talking about the MGM Grand in Reno, was the biggest casino in the world. We had other casinos around the area that had been established for many, many years. But there was a point in time where in the entire northern Nevada, just out of our tiny little casino, we were writing over half the business of the entire region. So we really went in there. We did a lot of good things by giving bettors a fair bet. Listen, I never believed in lost leaders. Still don't to this day. So we gave guys a fair bet, treated customers fairly. Listen, you win and you lose, and when you lose, you lick your wounds and come out fighting again the next day. That's what you do. And we stayed consistent, and our business model got a lot of accolades, I think, which is well deserved. And we grew it from that tiny little spot into really a statewide powerhouse, and I guess kind of the meat and potatoes of an international powerhouse now that William Hill has come in and purchased Calneva.
So before we move on to the Q&A, what was I guess, you started off booking parlay cards, started taking action. You go out to Vegas, you're a ticket writer in the mob days. Hard work, smart, right connections, right family. You move up through the food chain, you're running a casino, you make it profitable. What was the tail end of the career that made you say, hey, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore, I want to try something else? Like, what was that part of your life? And then once we get that, we're going to get right to the Q&A, because I got about 15 questions to go through, and I don't want to miss anyone. So, Chris, I'm going to hand it once again back off to you.
Okay, well, I'll give you a brief little story here, take a little sidetrack. In '88, I had a little bit of a beef with ownership at Calneva. Just don't want to get into too many details, but I wound up actually leaving Calneva for a short time. So I left them, and while I was gone, Calneva had a horse tournament that was at that time the biggest tournament in the world. Well, guess what? I joined the tournament just as a customer, and I won it. And it was about $50,000 with all the prize money and everything else. So shortly after that, they weren't too happy with me winning that. Believe me, that was not like a good thing in their eyes. But shortly after that, they came back and they said, "Listen, we want you to come back." They saw it meant a huge difference to the bottom line. We want you to come back, and when you come back, we're going to make you an owner. We want to, and it was me and two others, Bill McHugh and Jeff Seary. Jeff is still, well, I guess Jeff now technically owns Calneva, and Bill McHugh is president. And so the three of us became partners in the company too. So from 91 through 2003, I was part owner there. And in 2003, my cousin, Tim Poster, he bought the Golden Nugget. He, along with a couple of partners, they made me an offer to come down there as vice president of race and sports operations at the Golden Nugget. I took them up on that. My family's in Vegas, so I came to Las Vegas for that. I thought it was going to be a real good thing for our family. Even though I took a cut and pay, I sold my ownership in the Calneva, and it was, didn't work out. Let's just put it that way. Tim wound up selling the place in a year and a half, and the new ownership came in. Well, I'm not supposed to talk about this, but let's just say I wasn't retained. Um, things just, my life changed quite dramatically after that. I did go to work for Leroy's, who was a longtime competitor of mine. So that was with Vic Salerno. But, Vic is still a good friend. And even when we were competitors, I always said, Vic was at the baptism of every one of my children. So even though we were competitors, we were friendly competitors. And he hired me. I worked there for 3 years. But at the end of that run, I kind of wanted to get out of the business a little bit. I'd sort of had enough. Me and a couple Wall Street guys approached me. They wanted to put together a wealth management firm and a hedge fund. So we went and did that. I did that for a couple years. The hedge fund, we really never got off the ground. Long couple stories. My wife had some health issues and that delayed the opening of the hedge fund. And right as we were about to open it is when the crash of 2008 hit. And I don't have to tell you how. I mean, that was a doozy. So we never opened the hedge fund. We wound up opening the wealth management firm. That has now evolved into a trust company, which is actually doing quite well. However, I wanted to get out of that. I wasn't happy being out of gaming. I missed it more than I missed the aggravation. I missed it more than it aggravated me being in it. So Jeff Seary, when he was with Calneva still, made me an offer to come back there and help them through the transition as William Hill was purchasing them. And I did that. And then once it was one company with William Hill and Leroy's and Lucky's, they made me an offer that I really didn't like and decided to just take my skills elsewhere. And I wound up with Pregame after that. RJ and I had been doing some stuff for about a year and a half. And I liked Pregame. I knew you a little bit, John. We'd met once, I think, and talked on the phone. I loved the stuff that you guys were doing here. And I wound up at Pregame. And I think it's been a really good move for me.
Well, before we get to the Q&A from the Pregame community, I got one for you, Chris. And that's actually his ride. So, Chris, it is funny because I asked you when you picked me up to take me back to the hotel. And that was actually, we had a really nice dinner. Chris was got us this back room at this really nice Italian place in Vegas. Is Chris, who killed Jimmy Hoffa and where's the body buried at?
John, he's not in the trunk of my car. And if I did know and told you, I would have to kill you.
And for everybody who's watching, I knew my friends back home would not believe. I was like, I told one of them on a text, I'm like, dude, I'm listening to this guy who used to be here in the 70s, tell me these mob stories, and I swear to God that there probably had to be at least a couple bodies during the years that have been in the trunk of this car. So that's Chris's actual ride. That's actually Jimmy Hoffa, and that's a picture I took to Chris before we did some shots. I wanted to do Jameson. He wanted to do a different Irish whiskey. But, I've met Chris now a couple times in person, and he's one of the most real people you're ever going to meet. And his stories are legendary. And I wish we can kind of go more in detail on some of them, but I understand why not. So what we're going to do, Chris, we're going to get right to the Q&A. And what I want to do is we're sitting at about 7:37, so we've got about 23 minutes left. Unless it's something that you want to go a little extra on, couple quick bullet points and we'll move on. So the first question, Chris, to you is, when setting the line, do the odds makers hope to get equal amount of bets on either teams?
No, that's really a misnomer. What we want to do is we want to set a line that gives us a 50-50 shot of winning the game. That's the ultimate line, not splitting the bets, because you know what? You can't split the bets. It just never happens. So I want to put up a number that gives me a 50-50 shot of winning, whether you take the favorite or the dog.
And that's one of the things, Chris, a lot of times when I have people come to me, like friends or people who know what I do, they'll always ask me that. And I said, if that was true, look at any line service, and what do you think the mathematical odds are that every single sports book, all 150 of them on Don Bester Sports Options on some game, all have a team +4. So you mean none of them are getting different action or a big bet early? They're, like you said, is they're using the line that technically will put them in a position to have a 50-50 shot of winning. So next question, Chris. What are the first things you look at when setting a line, and then what needs to happen for you to make a strong adjustment?
Well, first of all, I keep power ratings, and I think that always gives you a place to start. Now you have to go into other situational events that may or may not be happening. A team's maybe playing its third straight road game, let's say, or a team suffered a key injury, or there's some emotional factor favoring one team over another. That'll get you to move a number one way. And listen, sometimes you just know the public's going to bet you one side. And listen, maybe I think the real number's 8.5, let's say. But you know what? I'm going to put it up 9 because I know the public's going to lay it anyway. So I might as well get that little extra % or 2 in my favor to do it. So sometimes I will do that. But ordinarily, I start with a power rating. that gives me my base. But don't get married to those power ratings. That just gives you a starting point. And then you kind of go from there. You may have a team that passes really well against a team that has a very poor pass defense, and then of course that's going to influence your number two. But that power rating, you have to keep those in every sport just to know where to start.
Next question. There are some teams that are fan favorites year in and year out, and the lines makers take full advantage of their popularity by padding the lines. How much will the lines makers overvalue these teams, and how and where can someone like me get information to know who those teams are? A great example of this is the UNLV Rebel basketball team, who are the darlings of the Vegas market. And given their history, they have a substantial national following, but they're only 4-5 against the spread. They play tonight at Northern Iowa at home and are 10-point favorites.
Well, I think that's really faded away a little bit in the last few years with Twitter, the Facebook, internet. It's kind of been coming right now. I mean, I'm from Pittsburgh. Go to any stadium in the country when the Steelers are playing. There's almost as many Steeler fans as anyone else. So I think the popularity of teams really has to do with how well they're winning as far as the betting goes. We had this question arise when betting on Nevada teams first came legal. And I answered a lot of those questions. They said, well, are people going to bet on Nevada? Are they going to bet on UNLV all the time? And I told the guys, listen, when they're winning, people will bet on them. When they're not winning, people won't bet on them. So I think that those days of just blanketly betting against the Cowboys, let's say, because they were always overvalued historically, betting against UNLV, I think there's spots when that happens. But overall, I think that is something the market has greatly accounted for over the last couple of years. You may find spots to do that in, but ordinarily, if that's your only strategy, it's going to wind up being a losing one.
To add on to that, I got two quick questions because I mean that's something that always interests me. Is during your heyday of when you were responsible for putting those lines on that board and making the movements, was there any team or teams that maybe outside of the statistical power rating where there was nothing outside just the math that you would weight certain teams a little more, a little less based off who they were?
Well, Johnny, I started in Reno in 81, and that's when the 49ers, which between the 49ers and the Raiders, I think the 49ers, they won 4 Super Bowls. Well, then 5 later on. They won the 5th with Steve Young in 93, I want to say. But the Raiders won a couple in between there, too. So those were the 2 home teams for Northern Nevada. And I used to just get, Niners and over was just an automatic. We get annihilated on that every single week. And you just have to kind of grin and bear it. And, so I did fade the number or shaded the number up a little bit higher. And the wise guys would come in, usually bet against the Niners, usually lose, by the way. But I welcomed their money in. They were getting, supposed value. But, when you burn your ticket, I'm not sure how valuable that is. And they were doing an awful lot of that. But you know what? I was glad to have them to help me offset some of the losses. But I just couldn't stop. These guys were coming in, betting Niners and over and winning most of the weeks.
So the second part of my question is I've heard the same thing with, I do a lot of correspondence with Las Vegas bookmakers via email for some content or tweets or hypotheticals. And I always hear that, especially in the last few years with Harbaugh and the 49ers, that Vegas gets a lot of 49ers and people from California coming down wanting to bet their teams. I know Vegas now uses some of the offshore stuff. There are not as many, unique lines, I guess you could say. Do you think any of the Vegas casinos shortchange maybe some of their futures on the 49ers? Do you just think they're using a standard line and just rolling with the punches?
I think they definitely shortchange people on the California teams and on popular teams, but it's not just those. I mean, go in and bet the Cubs every year. You're going to get robbed just because a lot of Chicago people come out here and they bet the Cubs every single year. So usually it's great value betting against the Cubs in any future book, whether it's and they don't always let you bet against the futures. I mean, a couple casinos have done that over the course of time to put a two-way price up. But yeah, the answer is yes. They do screw a lot of the guys who come in and are betting the popular teams. But in all honesty, one of the things I would say about Las Vegas that really bothers me is just how bad the future book is. When I had my future book at Calneva, we always tried to give the people, listen, again, no loss leaders, but I tried to give them a decent bet. When you when you lower one team, you need to raise another one. That's just the way it works. And I see very few guys do that. I'll give a couple of credits out where they're due. I think the kid at LVH, Jay Cornegay, does a very good job with his future book. Gives you a decent bet. Now Nick Bogdanovich, when he and I were together at the Golden Nugget, and then again get together at Calneva, even after when I left and came back, Nick always gave a great book. I'm not sure what they're doing at William Hill right now. I honestly don't know whether it's good or bad. I couldn't tell you one way or the other. I know if it was up to Nick, it would be probably one of the best. But right now, LVH, Jay Cornegay does a terrific job. But other than that, the futures in this town are awful.
Going to the next question, Chris, and this kind of goes back to your days, is are there any particular big players or action junkies that you remember? And if so, can you tell us a quick story?
My favorite story is we had one guy, and he was actually originally from Pittsburgh, although he was living in the Bay Area, and he was a complete betting maniac. He'd come in, and I mean, he had it bad, but I mean, he was a very wealthy man and very difficult to get along with. But John, I think you're kind of the same way. A lot of these guys who are like big pricks, they always kind of liked me. And my wife would always laugh. She'd say, "Yeah, because you're one of them. That's why." So I knew you'd laugh at that, Johnny, because I think we're in the same vein on that. But this guy he got along really well with me, and I could kind of handle him. Well, my favorite story is he came in and one time he bet $250,000 on the Vikings against the Bears. It was a Sunday night game. This was in '87. Minnesota scored late to go up by 4. Jim McMahon had gone out of the game, so I had Mike Tomczak, and on fourth down from his own 20 with about 30 seconds of play, Tomczak threw just a little pass out in the flat, and Dennis Gentry turned it into an 80-yard touchdown and beat him for that $250,000. And he just went ballistic. He was down in the pit trying to win the money back, and if he got a bad hand from the dealer, just rip the cards up and throw it right back in the dealer's face. And that's one of my favorites. Of course, we won that one. I had a couple other ones where we didn't win, but that was always my favorite. And mostly because I kind of liked the guy, although he was really not a very nice man. But he just used to go bananas. So, and that was one time he did, and that was a pretty big bet. $250,000 back in '87. That's a big bet.
This actually asked this question a friend of mine in Vegas, Frank Perez. He's a professional bettor. He used to do a poker back in the days, and I actually did a video interview with him, and I brought up the whole old versus new Vegas. And he's a big fan of the old Vegas. He said the bookmakers actually took a bet where he feels new Vegas, they should have a charity license because they only want suckers and they're not willing to actually be bookies. So if I had to ask you, old Vegas versus new Vegas, which one do you like better?
Oh, not even close. Old Vegas, not even close. And these corporations have come in, and John, it's one of those things. I've just seen so many of these guys, and first of all, a bookmaker should not be in a suit and tie. That's number one. As soon as you see that, that it's a big phony job. And when you see guys, you go to the meetings, and you're in, maybe you're in finance, or you're in marketing, and you read the sports page. You know what? We're going to put you in charge of the book.
Is that why Jimmy Vaccaro fucking walks around?
Not Jimmy Vaccaro.
He walks around in a t-shirt and sweatpants.
That's a bookmaker.
Hell yeah.
Jimmy Vaccaro is a bookmaker. He was my first real buy. That's who I reported to when I was at the Barbary Coast.
Hey, Chris, I don't know if you're comfortable telling this story, but you told us when we went to that Cuban joint, the story where you lost the ticket and you had to wake Jimmy up in the middle of the night. You comfortable telling that one?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. we were taking some very big bets at the Barbary Coast, and like I said, the way it was, you had to do the accounting at the end of the night. So we had a very big customer who was betting some large amounts. So I'm balancing at the end of the night. Now my shift ended at midnight. I couldn't balance. I couldn't balance. So 2 o'clock in the morning, I finally said, you know what? I gotta call Jimmy.
How much was
Call
the
him up.
discrepancy?
250,000.
Okay.
So, so a serious number, John. You know?
So at the end of the night, you're doing the books and you're missing $250,000. And what year was this?
I'm $250,000 short. So I called Jimmy up, you know, and I could hear him wake him up. Yeah, what's up? I said, Jimmy, I'm $250,000 short. He pauses for a second. He says, well, did you take it? I said, well, Jimmy, if I took it, I wouldn't be calling you. He says, okay, well, turn it in. They'll find it in the morning. And he hangs up on me.
Now that's a bookmaker. The guy wants to sleep. You wake him up in the middle of the night saying you're missing $250,000. He's like, did you steal it? No. All right, we'll worry about it tomorrow.
Right. Yeah, Johnny, I guarantee you he was asleep 10 seconds later. I promise you. He didn't spend more than 8 seconds worrying about it. And of course, it was a ticket for 125,000 that I put in the wrong column. I put it in the plus instead of the minus, and there was my $250,000. So, yeah, that was a biggie right there. I didn't sleep. Jimmy slept a lot better than I did that night. I can tell you that.
This kind of correlates to the old versus new. They didn't technically run it, but they had an influence. The mob, and then now we have the corporations. You've seen the movie Casino, the infamous count room, and everything else. What would you say would be the major difference in the two? Like, what were some of the rules? Like, I mean, obviously a guy like Spilatro or the Chicago guys, the outfit, they didn't come in and tell you guys how to do your job or what they expected, but they kind of had that influence. What would you say, because you were there when the corporate guys were there, like what were some of like the best practices or how they wanted you to do your job versus say the corporations? Corporate America maybe tells you, we want you in a suit and tie, you got to do this,
Right.
we want this. Like, what were some of the differences in management and what they expected or how they wanted you to run your shop versus the mob guys versus the corporation?
Well, I really think back then that those kind of guys, the street guys, and I'm a little bit of a hybrid of both, John, to be honest with you, because I mean, I am college educated and I came up in the corporate world. My initiation as I grew up in this business was more with street guys, down, it's oftentimes very ethnic guys. Like in Pittsburgh, there was, I'm a Greek, the Greeks hung out and they were in a certain area of town. And there's, the Italians and the Jewish guys and then the Irish guys, the Polish, and there's all that sort of thing. And I think the mob guys, I think when they kind of ran the town, and again, that's a very broad statement. They didn't run the town, but it was those kind of guys who they knew the customers. They knew how to handle people in a different way. And yeah, you heard the stories about, you take them into the alley and beat them up when they owed you money. I mean, those are like very few and far between. To be honest with you, most of those guys deserved it. But what they knew how to take care of their customers. Listen, you were a gambler and you came into town and you blew some money and listen, maybe you needed $1,000 to get back home. They give it to you. They knew to comp you at a you just walked in the joint. They knew you from all the hundreds of times you'd been there before. Here, go get some dinner. Go get a drink before you pulled any money out of your pocket. Go to the show. We got Sinatra's playing tonight. I know. Now it's everything's like you have to show me first, and we're going to track you. And once you play X amount, we'll give you a comp, and we'll do those sort of things. We've run a study, and all this kind of, a lot of it's a bunch of crap, to be honest with you, Johnny. And I understand that's how the thinking goes. But back in the old days, they really didn't need that kind of thinking because they kind of knew it. And John, I would tell you the difference is, like if you go into the Olive Garden and eat dinner, and then go into some restaurant run by mom and pop who just come over on the boat from Naples and see who's going to give you better food. And that's kind of the difference between the two. The one thing I will say about the corporations that did need to be done, and had those guys done it this way, we probably wouldn't be where we are today. You needed to have a better paper trail of all the money and where it went. And that's how a lot of the skimming and all that stuff happened. And had they just kind of taken care of their own house a little bit better, we probably wouldn't be with the corporations running these joints now.
Twofold question, Chris. But the same question technically, but two different eras. Sharpest books in Vegas during your day, sharpest books in Vegas right now.
Well, when I first came to town, Churchill Downs was still operating, and they were the gold standard. They took the biggest bets. You knew they had the best line. Um, you'd never get screwed around at Churchill. If they told you, let's say NFL, we take 20,000, then they took it. They didn't come in and say, well, who knows what? We don't know. We're not sure who you are. And we're already loaded on that side. We only want 5. You never got that crap from Churchill. And Bob Martin was there for a long time. Then Bob on the born in Union Plaza, and again, that's when I first got to town. Bob was just getting out of the business. So those were the sharpest back then. Kind of a little after that, the Stardust was legendary, and that was Scotty Shetler, who I replaced up in Reno. Scotty came down here to the Stardust. And not so much that Scott, and I don't want to make this sound like a knock on Scott. It's not. It's a compliment. Scotty maybe wasn't the sharpest guy, but Scotty knew how to take a bet and book it. And I say a lot of guys today, they're not bookmakers, they're bet takers. They want to take the bets. They look at the screen, and the screen tells them, should I move it or not? Oh, it didn't move anywhere. I'm not going to move it. Well, that's not really bookmaking. That's bet taking. And Scott was a bookmaker. So if a guy came in and if it was a guy he respected and the guy laid him 2.5, Scott would go to 3. And so Scott was very good at seeing the action and reacting accordingly. And that's what a bookmaker did in those days. Because listen, you can get the line, you put it out, and you may think you're right, John, but there's thousands of guys betting it. You have to change your mind. You're just not going to be right on every single game. And Scott was very good at that. And Scott, again, was not afraid to take a bet. So he took some pretty good ones, and they had a good line. When Nick Bogdanovich ran the Horseshoe, that was one of the great spots. I'm very partial to the Barbary Coast. Jimmy Vaccaro was there when I was there. My uncle was the odds maker and kind of like the consultant. Jimmy ran the day-to-day. Then, of course, Jimmy went over to the Mirage. That's when we kind of started becoming the new modern Vegas. I think it was when the Mirage got built here back in '89, I guess it was. That was really the hallmark of a new era dawning in Las Vegas. Jimmy was there. That's kind of the transition. But when Jimmy was running the Mirage, that was one of the great books that you would ever see here in this state. As far as right now, John, I think the LVH, I think Jay Cornegay does a terrific job over there. They don't take the biggest bets, but he takes what he takes and moves the number accordingly, puts up a lot of different things. Very aggressive bookmaker in a lot of ways, has a lot of propositions, has a great future book, as I said. Right now, I like the South Point. South Point, they do a lot of square business. That's the kind of guys that go in there. But Bert Osborne runs that, and they're not afraid to take a bet either. And again, Michael Gaughan owns the South Point. Frank Tody's one of the partners over there, and under their direction, Bert just, Bert will take a bet because he knows Michael and Frank understand that you could lose. That's what happens, and that's what I think has hurt so many of these other corporate places. See, Michael's place, that's not really a corporation. Michael owns that and has a couple of partners, but it's more of a standalone. So Michael doesn't really have to answer to a board of directors or anything like that. And hence Bert doesn't either. So Bert takes bets that Michael's comfortable with, and they take some pretty big ones. So I'd say South Point, LVH, probably my 2 favorite in town right now.
2 more questions, and then we're going to get to the coupon for everyone who is listening and watching right now to give you $10 off any one purchase of pregame. If you had to start a sports book, Chris, and you had three options in order of who you would want to be the ones to run your shop, the bookmakers from your era, the offshore bookmakers of today, or the Vegas bookmakers of today, what order would you put them in?
Well, I bet a trifecta, and the bookmakers of Las Vegas today, I would key them in the three hole. So uh, the the offshore guys today, I have a lot of respect for. Some really smart guys doing a lot of real good stuff. The bookmakers, the old time bookmakers from my era when I first started, I think they were just as good. Just the business has changed. So I think those are kind of a pick 'em. And those guys I'm going to put like myself, Jimmy Vaccaro, and Nick Bogdanovich. We're kind of the old and the new. And really, I think if you wanted to start a book and you had me, Jimmy, or Nick, or you know what, all three of us working together, we would, because we all love each other and get along great. We'd love to run a book together. That would be fantastic. But I think we would do a great job. But really, we would move away from what was happening 20 years ago because it's just different. I mean, it's like, would Vince Lombardi be a great football coach today? Yeah, well, he would, because he was smart enough to do things differently than he did in the 60s. He wouldn't be the same person. He would be smarter and take advantage of all the new stuff that's going on. So I make it a pick on between the old Vegas bookmakers and the offshore guys today.
Actually, I want to go to two more. I just had one pop out on the screen that this is a great question, and I kind of know the answer, but obviously the people listening and going to be watching on the archives don't. Is during your bookmaking days, did you ever take any bets from Billy Walters? Did you take them, or did you turn his guys down?
Uh, well, well, it's a difficult question to answer. Uh, did I ever have Billy walk up to the counter and bet me? No. Well, yeah, I shouldn't say that. Yes, he did a couple times. I never turned him down. What we did, we did. You know, as far as like whatever our limits were, I always held him to those. I mean, there's times I knew they were Billy's bets, however you want to construct that. And yeah, we took them. We moved the hell out of him once he bet us. I could promise you that. Well, you know, when I knew it was Billy's guys. But there's a couple times when he did come up and make me a bet. And, you know, I can always say I got along very well with Billy Walters. I've been out to dinner with Billy. I've been to lunch with Billy. I find him he's a very pleasant, very personable guy. I know what he is. I know he's probably, I would call Bob Martin, I would say, is Babe Ruth, and Billy Martin and Billy Walters is Michael Jordan. It's just a whole different era, and he's the sharpest of the sharp. And you know, certainly as a bookmaker, you have to watch yourself. You have to be careful. But Billy, as far as I know, has never screwed me on anything. We have a we I would consider it to be a very good relationship.
Last question before we get to the coupon. Chris, do you have any tips for a recreational gambler in regards to the best sports for soft lines? I guess what they're trying to ask is, with all of this stuff, with you making lines and you knowing that business, would I'm assuming NFL lines are probably the tightest.
Yeah.
Going down the food chain, if you're trying to give advice to somebody for a sport to focus on, as being a former bookmaker with as many years as you did, as many connections as you have, what would you say? What sports have the softest lines?
Not even close. College basketball, but don't handicap. You know, the Big Ten, the Big 12, the SEC, the ACC. Forget about those. I mean, you want to, look at the Big Sky, or the WCC, or the Colonial Conference, or something like that. Whatever conference Winthrop and Wofford's in, you know, focus on something like that. If you're in that area of the country, that would be the best, because you can go to the games, you could actually visualize matchups that really, guys like us, I mean, I don't know how good like the starting point guard is for Wofford, let's say, and they're playing against Elon. I mean, I don't know what the matchup advantages may be. I'm looking at some raw data. I look at assist to turnover ratios. I look at 3-point field goal percentage, and all that crap, and that's going to give me an idea. But I'm not going to know it as well as you are if you're going to all the games and you're following every team and getting all the news. And I would tell you that's the way. If you want to be successful in the business, I would start with that. That's your best shot to find some soft numbers.
Real quick, everyone who joined me, Johnny Detroit, and Chris Andrews, both technically I can now say from pregame.com, coupon code Bookmaker10. Once again, coupon code Bookmaker10 will give you $10 off any one purchase. The coupon will expire in the next 72 hours. Chris, I want to say it's been a huge pleasure. Hopefully we could do this again. Maybe the next time we'll go over more handicapping and handicapping tips. But I just felt it was important with you really getting more and more involved with pregame. We got a lot of exciting stuff on the horizon that most everybody outside of me, you, and RJ aren't even aware of yet. I'm sure there'll be a lot more webinars and we could do a lot of different things, but I just felt it was really important for the first one for our audience to get to know who you are, what your track record is, and to know when we say things like former bookmaker Chris Andrews, or we say things, it's not a bunch of bullshit. So, Chris, before we head out, is there anything you want to say to the pregame community before we sign off for the night?
I didn't know we could say bullshit, John. You should have told me that
Dude,
earlier.
honestly, I think I said the F word like 40 minutes ago. But go ahead.
No, I just want to say, really, since I got here, I've known RJ a little bit better, but Johnny, I got to know you, and it's funny. Johnny, I love you. I think we're two of the same kind of guys, and I just wish you weren't in Detroit. I wish you were in Vegas so I could see you more often. We could drink a little more Irish whiskey together.
Hey, you had me at hello, big guy. All right, so I'm Johnny Detroit. He's Chris Andrews. I want to say thanks for everyone who attended. If there's anything you want to see in a future webinar, you can always email me at johnny@pregame.com. Don't forget that coupon code Bookmaker10 will take $10 off. So on behalf of pregame.com, I'm Johnny Detroit. He's Chris Andrews. Thanks for watching. That's going to do it. Good night.